Hello everyone, welcome to task for today, TFT-20. We are studying Sociology from paper 1 as well as paper 2. We have completed topics 1 to 4 from paper 1 and then we covered sociological perspectives of paper 2, and now we are doing social stratification and mobility to help us understand the correlation between papers 1 and 2. In sociology, you must remember that you cannot read P1 and P2 separately. Instead, you should understand the correlation or the application of P1 on P2 as well as the understanding of world sociology and society in India. So, let's begin. First of all, what is strata? We have borrowed this concept from geology. It refers to layers. In geology, the definition is different than what is used in sociology. So, only the term has been borrowed and not the meaning, right? So while in geology the process of stratification is a natural process, but in sociology the stratification process is socially created by man. Before understanding social stratification, there is another term that you should know, that is social inequality. Inequality means unequal what? Maybe opportunity, wealth, power, anything which people enjoy differently. And social stratification, it is a particular form of social inequality. That means it is inequality plus certain other characteristics. This is social stratification. That means arrangement of society in the form of different layers on the basis of certain features. What are these features? We are going to study today. So what are these features? A stratification system consists of a hierarchy. What does hierarchy mean? That means the arrangement of people in different layers or in the form of certain groups. That means perhaps this is group 1, this is group 2, this is group 3. This is known as hierarchy. Each group shares certain similar features, but subsequent groups, they share certain dissimilarities. Also, there is an element of inequality. G1 is not equal to G2, G2 is not equal to G3. Another point is difference. Subsequent groups, these groups of people, they are different in certain ways, certain features, certain characteristics. Also, there is exclusion. Exclusion means you exclude someone from a particular group. For example, there is a group of people or students who have secured 70% in their 10th. 70% and above, let's say. And there is another group of student which has secured less than 70%. So, if these students, they form a group, let's say they want to go to some restaurant and they want only those people to be included, those students to be included who have secured 70%. So, this category of student has been excluded. Similarly, in society also, there are different groups of people people in a particular group have certain similarities, and this group excludes those people or those groups of people who lie in another group. Another feature in social stratification is the element of poverty and deprivation. Poverty and deprivation, what does it mean? In a society, there are people who have more money, who have more number of houses, more number of facilities. Maybe they have educational opportunities, but there are certain groups of people who are deprived of all these privileges. They are the underprivileged or unprivileged people, and they will come or belong to the lower strata of people. So these are different stratum or strata in plural. These are the features you should remember, because you will have to apply it in the world as well as in the Indian context. So there are 3 points that you should remember, that these difference may be in power, in prestige, as well as in wealth. And social stratification refers to the presence of social groups which are ranked one above the another. These. Now, we remember the French society that we studied about during emergence of sociology. So, there were 3 estates. The society was divided into 3 estates. The first estate, which enjoyed higher power, prestige and wealth, was the clergy, people who worked in the church, the Roman Catholic Church. The second estate, which came below the first estate, was the nobility, the king, queen, nobles, princes, dukes, counts, knights, anyone who belonged to the, let's say, monarchy. These people belong to the second estate. So hierarchically, these are higher and these are lower than the first estate. The third estate, which was the oppressed and the exploited estate, was the group which consisted of the lawyers, the doctors, the merchants, soldiers, workers, peasants. They had no voice and they had to pay the taxes for the nobility as well as the clergy. So these taxes were used by the higher estates to spend money, to enjoy their life, to lead a lavish life. This was the French society. Now what about India? Indian society also reflected a certain type of social stratification. It was the caste system. We are talking about that time when sociology emerged and people started studying Indian society. At that time, the first feature or distinctive feature that they studied in India was the caste system. They saw that there was a certain rigid system which existed in society, in Indian society, which had certain features. So, the anthropologists, the thinkers, the administrators, government officials of the colonial rule as well as Indians, they started studying Indian society and the caste system. The caste system included 4 types of social groups. The higher up were the Brahmins, the priests who were the privileged people. Second one was the Kshatriyas or the warriors. Third were the Vaishyas who were the merchants and the landowners. Fourth were the Shudras who did most of the menial jobs. They were servants, subordinates to Vaishyas, Kshatriyas and Brahmins. There was a fifth group which did not fall in the caste system. It was the untouchable class or untouchable caste, not even a caste. These were people who were living outside the villages that time, because that time we had villages, and they were cobblers or street sweepers or cleaners. So these were oppressed and exploited by the higher caste people. How? Because they was doing all the work which was considered to be impure or not of much prestige by the higher castes. Thus, there was an element of inequality of power, prestige, wealth. Also, it included an element of exploitation and oppression. So, from these two examples, what can we infer? What could be the dimensions of social stratification? First one, of course, would be wealth. But this is not the only form of stratification. There can be stratification on the lines of other features also. There can be certain differences, certain inequalities, certain discrimination or exploitation on the basis of other features. What are these features? First one is ethnicity. For example, people belonging to, ethnicity means origin. So, people belonging to certain nations, for example, the third world nations, or people belonging to certain tribes, they are considered to be of a lower status by those who enjoy a higher status. So there is an element of superiority. Now you should understand one thing, that this superiority is not biological, or it is actually created by man, because people of certain nations, they think that they are more superior than the other nations. Some tribes, let's say, they think of themselves as superior. Similarly, certain races, the whites, think that they are more superior than the blacks. Then there are certain genders, for example, the males are considered more eligible, more able, more smarter, more wise, more knowledgeable than females and others. Then in the age group also, the working age group is considered to be more productive, while the children and the elderly, they are considered to be dependent on the working age group. So in some way or the other, one group of society or one social group is considered as inferior than the other group, and this is what we need to understand while studying social stratification, this division or this difference in position in the society. Now when we consider systems, if you remember, we read about open and closed system while studying Parsons. Similarly, in social stratification also, there can be open or closed system. An open system is one which is flexible, it allows movement, while a closed system is rigid, it restricts. So, in a society also, when there is a hierarchy, when there are division, when there are certain groups, then let's assume this is G1, G2, G3. In an open system, there is easy movement between these groups, between 1, 2, 3. That means in the case of class or status, for example, if a person is belonging to lower class, but he or she has educated himself and he has got a good job, he is earning well, and now he has risen up in society and he is now belongs to, let's say, the middle class. So there is only one way out, and that he has done. He has educated himself. Therefore, the class system will be considered an open system because it is allowing a person from the lower class to move up the ladder to the middle class. Similarly, in status also, for example, if there is a person who had a very poor lifestyle, but with time, after attaining economic wealth, prestige and power, he has moved and now he belongs to a higher status group. Thus, status also, it allows a person to travel from one group to another. It is not restricting, it is open, it is flexible. But what happens in a closed system? In a closed system, for example, in the caste system, if one is born in a particular caste, then he or she remains in that particular caste throughout his life, and even his next generation will remain in that particular caste. So there is a rigidity and there is a restriction. These castes, for example, if you remember, if someone belongs to the Brahmin caste, then he or she will be a Brahmin throughout his life, and his son will also be a Brahmin. So there is an amount of rigidity as well as restriction. A person is restricted to this particular caste. Similarly, a person is born in a particular race, in a particular ethnicity, and as a particular gender. We are talking about India before independence, so we will not consider about the change in gender that is happening nowadays. During that time, there was no such facility or such privilege available. So if a person was born as a male or a female, then that person would remain in that particular gender. So this is also restrictive and rigid. Thus, open systems are usually related to achieved systems. That means you have achieved it by your own effort. But in a closed system, usually it has been ascribed. That means you are born into that particular group and you cannot change it willingly or unwillingly. You cannot change it. You are stuck in this particular group. So what happens if you want to move from one group to another? In that case, the system will have to be an open system which will allow movement. And this movement of people from one group to another or one stratum to another is known as social mobility. Mobility means movement. This can happen in two ways, either between different generations. For example, the person, if the parents, they belong to a lower middle class, but because the children, they have been educated and they climb up the ladder and they belong to a higher middle class. So this will be intergenerational mobility. The other type is intragenerational. That means in that same generation, if a person gets promotions, then he starts earning higher, and then maybe in 5 years he travels, he moves from the lower middle class to the higher middle class. These are two types of social mobility. Okay, so here the example you can see in the bottom of the strata this family is, and the children, they may, as per their education, they may travel to, let's say, the middle class or the higher class. Another type of mobility which is now prevalent or which has now become common is upward mobility and downward mobility. Now usually you will see that in all the studies in social researches that the mobility is always in the upward direction. That means a person will travel from a position of low wealth to high wealth, low power to high power, low prestige to higher prestige, because it is human tendency to look for higher goals, to look for stability, to look for success. But let's say a family, they were belonging to a higher class, but because of certain adversities, they lost their money or they became bankrupt. So now they have become a lower class group. So this movement will be a downward mobility movement. Now, what do the different thinkers have to say about social stratification? The first perspective is by the functionalists, and they say that even stratification, even this division of society into different layers is functional. It has certain functions. Functions to what? For the society. You would remember value consciousness or value consensus. That means agreement about the values which are to be followed, about the norms and beliefs. So there are two perspectives under functionalist. First one is by Parsons. He says that stratification unites people because it derives from shared values. So what shared values? Now let's say there is a society where there are 3 classes, and society is based on meritocracy. That means they agree that a person of a higher merit, of a higher ability, of a higher level of knowledge will occupy position 1, then the lower ones will occupy position 2, and people with the least potential will occupy position 3. So together they are agreeing, they are sharing the value of meritocracy. They are agreeing with one another, and that is why they accept this division of society into different layers or strata. They also say that the functionalist perspective says that in complex industrial societies, planning and organization requires some individuals to have more authority. For example, if you take the example of a business organization, you will see certain clerks doing the job of filing or preparing reports, but they will not be doing all the work by themselves. Instead, they will be given directions, they will be guided by people who are higher up in authority, for example, the manager or the supervisor. So Parsons says that in a society, everyone is performing the same job. If everyone is given the same strata or the same class, then who will do the planning and organization? Because if you remember, as the society progresses from the primitive society or pre-industrial society to the industrial society, we come across a new concept known as the division of labor. That means a society differentiates itself into different groups of people who perform different jobs. And if people are performing different jobs, then automatically there is inequality. There is a difference, and the difference is not only in performing the job but also in the rewards which are given to each group of people, because the task is associated with a certain difficulty and toughness, and it might require a higher aptitude. So if a difficult task is given to someone, then he will need a higher motivation to complete it, and therefore he should be given a higher reward, and thus a position of superiority or a position of authority, supervisor, is automatically created. But the Parsons view, it is not agreed by many theorists, especially the Marxists. They say that in a society, all the values are not shared. People may possess or they may abide by a different set of values, and this stratification system, it is actually divisive. It creates division in society. The other thinkers, they are Davis and Moore. They give the concept of role allocation. They say that in a society, some jobs are functionally more important while the other jobs are less important. So the jobs which are more important, they require people of a higher ability, and because they need higher ability or higher training, so they should be given a better reward. This reward can be in the form of wealth, power and prestige. So you can see how the functionalist gave a function of stratification. But even here, Davis and Moore, they were criticized by Melvin Tumin. He said that functional importance is not attached to only the high paid jobs, because even the lower jobs are as important, or unskilled jobs are as important as the higher paid. For example, we have cleaners, then there are people who, for example, the plumber, a mechanic. So these people also perform a very important role, and if they do not perform these roles, then we will face difficulty. That means they are also vital, important to societal functioning. But the Marxian perspective looked at social stratification from the angle of exploitation. We have read the Martian Perspective in quite detail while studying the thinkers. If you remember that in the capitalist system, there are two classes, the ruling class and the subject class. They are also known as the capitalist class or the bourgeoisie and the working class or the proletariat. The proletariat is exploited and it is given a lesser wage because the capitalists are interested in accruing more and more profit. In the process, the lower class, the subject class, experiences alienation, and the ruling class in return, it uses the superstructure to justify its position through false consciousness. This is the Martian perspective. You will have to revise topic 4a. This perspective is exactly the one that we have studied before. The class consciousness, the class struggle, alienation, and the proletarian revolution. So, Marxian perspective is looking at the negative aspect of social stratification in terms of division of society and difference in society. The next one is the Weberian perspective, Max Weber. Like Marx, Weber also sees class in economic terms. Weber gives 3 types of classification. First one is class, second one is status group, third one is parties. According to him, class is a group of individuals which shares a similar position in the market economy. That means in economic terms it is higher placed in society, and that particular, the higher class, receives a higher economic reward. Higher economic reward may be in the form of salary or other privileges in society, which will be economic. But Weber says that class is not the only type of feature of a social stratification. A social stratification system can exist on the basis of a status group. What is a status group? Status group is a group which enjoys similar social honor. For example, people belonging to different same occupations, for example, the doctors, or people belonging to a certain ethnicity, a certain age, nationality, or gender, they enjoy a certain privilege, a certain prestige, a certain respect in society. And that is why a social stratification system or certain layers form in society. He also says that people belonging to a certain status group need not necessarily be in the same class. For example, there is a doctor. There may be a doctor who is quite wealthy. He may belong to higher class. There may be another doctor belonging to the middle class, and there may be another doctor who has maybe lost wealth or is not earning enough, and he belongs to the lower middle class. So, a status group can cut across class divisions, right? This is what is meant by the statement. The third type of group is the one which enjoys political power. Weber says that on the basis of political power also, people can be divided into certain social groups, and the group which enjoys the most political power is he gave the term party or parties. Okay, so you can see that Weber says that social stratification can be on the basis of difference in class, status, or power. In the class stratification, he gave 4 types of class. First one was which enjoyed property, and it was the upper class which also owned land. Second one was that class which consisted of workers, but they did not have any property. Third one was petty bourgeoisie, that means it belonged to the capitalist class, but they were not that much wealthy, or maybe they did not own the land, therefore they were of a lower status. And the final class would belong to those people who did all the manual work. So this is the division that Weber gave. Now, how was social stratification studied in India? In India, people are divided on the lines of caste, tribes, and we have something known as class. Now, these two are ascribed. That means a person is born in a particular caste or a tribe. And these are rigid divisions. One cannot move from one caste to another. One cannot move from one tribe to another. And there is no flexibility, and hence there is a restriction on movement. But there is another section or group which is defined by class. These people, they have achieved certain wealth or education, and that is why they belong to a certain class. Now, you should understand one thing, that caste as well as tribe, these, if we want, we can divide them into different classes. So here you can see that class is cutting across different castes as well as tribes. But what happened in pre-independence period, when society was being studied for the first time in India? That time we had no concept of this class. We were mainly interested in caste and tribes. That time the class structure which existed was mainly in the villages, that was known as the agrarian structure. So people who started studying Indian society, different anthropologists, foreigners as well as Indians, then sociologists, they mainly studied castes and tribes and in the villages, and there they found that there is also something known as agrarian class structure. While studying different villages, people came across caste system which was common to all the villages, and the major thinkers who have studied caste system in India are G.S. Gude, M.N. Srinivas, Louis Dumont, Andhra Bete and Dipankar Gupta. There are many other sociologists also who have studied some aspects of the caste system, but these are the major sociologists who will be studying today. First one is by G.S. Gude. He studied 6 features of the caste system. What are these 6 features? First one, he said that Indian society or the caste system was segmental. There was a segment. Segment means the strata that we said, this is known as different segment. And he said that these segments were not homogeneous. Homogeneous means similar, and they mix in each other. But according to Ghule, he said that these divisions, these strata or layers, they were they were different, and there was a boundary between subsequent layers. So there was a lack of homogeneity as well as there were certain boundaries. The next one was hierarchy. Hierarchy was the same that we studied. He said that there were certain layers in society, layers of certain groups, and there was an element of hierarchy. That means there was an element of superiority and inferiority, and Brahmins were at the top of the hierarchy while Harijans were at the other end. There were also caste panchayats to ensure that these rules made for different castes were followed strictly. The third feature was that there were restrictions on food as well as social intercourse. That means social intermingling. So what were the restrictions? For example, the lower caste people, they could not eat food cooked in ghee. Only the higher caste could do that. Also, the lower caste were considered untouchable. Okay? They were associated with pollution or impurity. Why impurity? Because they were supposed to perform only those tasks which were considered impure by the society, impure by the higher castes. So they would have to restrict themselves in their food habits and also in the social intermingling. They could not mix with people of higher caste because of their untouchability. The fourth feature was that there were certain restrictions on civil as well as religious privileges. For example, they could not access public places, public wells. Also, education was reserved for the higher castes. Even the reading of scriptures or spiritual books, they were confined to the higher castes, and lower castes were not permitted to read the scriptures. Even Sanskrit language was not open to the lower castes. The fifth point was that if someone was born as a cobbler or a sweeper, he or she would remain a sweeper throughout his life, and even the next generation would perform the same occupation. So this occupation was also fixed because some occupations were considered superior and others were considered inferior. So an inferior person would not perform a superior occupation. A person who was a cobbler could not suddenly become a teacher, or even his son or daughter could not become a teacher. There were sacred occupations, for example, priests or those who taught, and these occupations were not open, they were closed to the lower castes. The sixth point, there were restrictions on marriage also. A person belonging to a certain caste had to marry within that particular caste only. There were prohibitions on intercaste marriages, but there were certain exceptions also. But while studying the caste system, we will mainly focus on the restrictions. So in short, G.S. Gure, if you want to understand, that the first point will be segmental division of society. Second will be hierarchy. Third will be food habits and social intermingling. Fourth will be civil and religious rights. Then occupation. And finally, on the concept of marriage. These were the defining features of the caste system as studied by G.S. Gure. Now the next thinker who studied caste system was M.N. Srinivas. He also gave similar features of caste system. First one was hierarchy. Second, occupational differentiation. Third was the restrictions. Fourth was the element of pollution. And fifth was caste panchayats. But he gave two more terms. He said that although the caste system was a rigid system and it did not allow movement from one caste to another, a certain degree of movement or social mobility was observed in society. He termed this movement as Sanskritization. Sanskritization is the phenomena in which a person belonging to a lower caste imitates the food habits, the lifestyle of the higher caste in order to become a part of the higher caste. This is known as Sanskritization. It is the process by which a low caste or tribe or other group takes over the custom, ritual, beliefs, ideology and style of life of a high and in particular a twice born or Dvija caste. This is known as cultural imitation. For example, they change their food habit from non-vegetarianism to vegetarianism. They change their occupation from the unclean occupation to a clean occupation. So what is the effect of this change? There is an improvement in the position in the low caste, local hierarchy. So there is an element of social mobility. We can relate these to westernization, where people adapt the habits of the clothing style of Western world. But Sanskritization, it refers to the changes in the Indian tradition. That means it is a different concept or a much broader concept than only westernization. M.N. Srinivas studied this in the Coorgs of South India, and he has been critiqued. We will see why. But before that, we need to study another concept which was given by M.N. Srinivas. That was dominant caste, and we can see its evidence in today's society also. He said that even though according to the caste system there is a certain arrangement of social groups, for example the Brahmins are at the top and then other castes they follow. But he said that in some villages, in some areas, this hierarchy was not followed. This hierarchy was changed. So what happened? In those places, a new caste climbed up the hierarchy. It was the dominant caste. The dominant caste was that caste which was of a higher number. The population, it enjoyed a higher population in that particular area. Also, it had a lot of property. Along with that, it enjoyed political power. All these things it enjoyed, and that is why it became a dominant caste. So, this also was an evidence of social mobility, because even if a caste is in lower position in the social hierarchy, it can become a dominant ruling class or group in a village if it enjoys the required numbers, land and political power. So what does this illustrate? It illustrates the openness of the caste system, the flexibility of the caste system. The village under study was Rampura village in Mysore, and the examples of certain dominant castes are the Patidars in Gujarat, the Marathas in Maharashtra. But this concept of Biman Srinivas has been critiqued on the following grounds. The first one is that he kept the lower castes and the Dalits out of his representation of Indian tradition. He did not include it while studying him. Second was that he identified the Hindu tradition as a Hindu tradition. Also, other thinkers, they say that his perspective provides a partial explanation of the differences, because he did not include certain classes. Also, he looked at only the Hindu tradition. Third thinker was Louis de Moore. His theory was mainly based on the concept of purity and pollution. He studied the caste system on the basis of the concept of purity and pollutions. He said that some castes were more pure while the other castes, they were impure and they were responsible for pollution. So he wrote this concept in his book Homo Hierarchicus, and according to him the caste system was a system of ideas and values. It was a rational system. It showed difference in status and power, and there was a hierarchy of varnas. And the traditional societies, it was based on a hierarchy on purity and pollution. So purity and pollution of what? Of rituals. The rituals made certain castes pure. He also said that the traditional system, the stratification was based on the Jajmani system. What was this Jajmani system? It was the exchange of goods and services between the land-owning higher caste and the landless service caste. So, how did Louis de Moore define structure of a society or stratification? On the basis of two classes. First one was which had land, and second one was which did not have land. And because of this, the hierarchy, the lower class, they were restricted, and there were certain rules which applied on them. For example, they could not contact those of a higher class. They had to remain outside the society. They could not eat certain food. So all these rules were applicable to the lower caste people. According to Louis de Moore, he said that in Indian society, the ideology played a very important role in molding human behavior. That means the differentiation or difference which was experienced or seen in Indian society, it was governed by ideas. Ideas of what? Ideas of purity and pollution, which was written according to the people in the scriptures or spiritual texts. So here we can see it in detail. Idea of purity and pollution was based on superiority of the pure and inferiority of impure. There was certain separation based on marriage, contact, food. Also certain occupations were restricted, and those who enjoyed purity, they were higher up in society, higher up in the hierarchy. The fourth thinker to study social stratification was Andre Bethe. He followed the Weberian approach. Weberian approach, just now we have studied. His approach was based on class, status and party or power. Similarly, Andre Bethe also said that in Indian society, property differences generate classes, while difference in social prestige generate status groups, and finally political power, the difference generates parties. So he studied a Tanjore village in South India, Shripuram, and there he studied the agrarian structure, and he said that this is how the different classes are formed, different status are formed, as well as different parties are formed. And he also said that stratification cannot be restricted to caste alone, but it is a combination of caste, class plus power. All these three will define the position of a person in a society. And therefore, if we are studying society from a Weberian approach, then we will consider all these three features. But there was another thinker who was moving in the opposite direction, in a different direction, and he studied social stratification from a different angle. He said that a society need not be divided into different strata vertically. Inequality should not be the defining feature of any society, and we cannot assume that there is only one hierarchy where the Brahmins are at the top and the Harijans are at the bottom. On the other hand, because of social mobility, castes have moved up in society, some castes have moved down. So we have new and parallel hierarchies which are running, and all the hierarchies are not uniform. All the caste divisions, they are not uniform, they are not universal. And if we want to study differences in society, then we should not necessarily bring into account inequality. On the other hand, if we want to study difference in society, we can arrange them vertically. For example, if we are studying languages, nationalities or different religions, it is not necessary to place one religion in a higher position, one language in a higher position, or one nation in a higher position, but instead we can enjoy the different features of each language, religion, nationality, and we can study them on an equal platform, on a horizontal scale. So he had a different concept about hierarchy. He stressed on difference and not inequality. So he said that differences rather than hierarchy are dominant in some systems, And therefore, social stratification should not only be defined by hierarchy, but it should be defined by differences. So he is quite modern in the study of social stratification, and if you are studying social stratification, then please include this thinker also. Now, after studying castes, we might think that where do the tribal communities fit in hierarchy? Now, you should know that when the Britishers started studying Indian society, because they wanted to govern, they wanted to administer, then they came across tribes and they saw that these tribes were living in isolation. They were mostly dependent on the forest produce. But because the Britishers, they wanted more land, they encroached in these forested areas, they took away their land, they took away their livelihood, and gradually these tribals, some of them, they were displaced, they moved to other areas, and finally when we became independent, the task before the government was to integrate these people, integrate these tribes into the mainstream society, that means this society. So the question now was, where in the hierarchy would the tribes be placed? Here or here or here or where? Then it was decided that these tribes, they would be integrated to mainstream society, they would become a part of the mainstream society, but at the same time they will keep their cultures intact. They would keep their languages, their customs and conventions. And with time, as we became modern, we became industrial, then education reached these people also. The tribal people, they educated themselves and they started working in different jobs, in different occupations, and they were not confined to villages, they were not forest dwellers, they were not dependent on forest produce. With education came wealth, came a good job, and thus they moved higher up in society, and according to their economic position, they occupied different strata of society. Maybe some of them could not progress, they were in the lower class, some in the middle class, others in the higher class. So the tribal communities, they have been distributed in various classes of society, and thus they have also experienced social mobility, and they come under the classes of society. Speaking of classes, as seen before, the sociologists studied the agrarian class structure. It included people who were landowners, people who were landless laborers. Then, after modernity, we had industrial classes also. Some were in the white collar jobs, some were in the blue collar jobs. Also, we experienced social mobility, and a middle class also came up. This middle class possessed features of higher salary or higher respect, And in today's era, in today's age, if we see even the villages or the cities, we will find that the middle class is actually present in both these structures. Because India, even though it is a modern nation, we still have villages, we still have agrarian structure. Similarly, in the cities we have, let's say, an industrial structure. But if we consider on an economic scale, if we consider middle class, then we will find that it will have people from agrarian structure as well as the industrial structure. This topic is very important, most important topic in sociology, and that is why you have to keep in touch with current affairs also. In the social mobility, there was a news about global social mobility index. So how is it to be measured? These are the pillars of social mobility. You can add it to your notes. For example, if we want to promote social mobility, we should work on health, educational access, quality and equity, lifelong learning, social protection, access to technology, work, fair wages, hygienic working conditions, and inclusive institutions. Each point is important to sociology. So in social stratification, if we want to improve the movement from one strata to another, each of us, each nation, each society, each community needs to work on these parameters, on these pillars. So today's topic you have to cover from the Blue Haralambas chapter on social stratification. But please remember that you do not have to read the entire chapter. Instead, you have to read only those portions which I have covered in today's TFT. Similarly, the BK Nagla's portion, you have to cover only that portion which has been taught today. Stratification is the most important topic, chapter of sociology. Therefore, one TFT will not be sufficient, and we will have shorter TFTs, shorter plus detailed TFTs later. Today's TFT was an introduction to stratification plus an effort to understand the correlation between paper 1 and paper 2. So your focus today should be on understanding this correlation. Please don't worry about the different theories, about the different concepts, about different thinkers. Focus on this correlation first, then automatically the other parts will be taken care of. So the next TFT will be on kinship, and as mentioned, we will have detailed TFTs on social stratification later. Today's TFT was to help you build a correlation between papers 1 and 2. That is all for today. We wish you all the very best. Please keep studying and work hard. You will get through. Enjoy.